Okay. I'll call to order the June 20th Harris Township Planning Commission meeting. And the first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from April 18th. Does anybody have any comments on those minutes, or can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay.
Second.
All right, thanks. Amy and Rich. Okay, all in favor of approving the April 18th minutes, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, that motion carries. Then we have time for public comment for anything that is not on the agenda tonight. Does anybody want to bring up anything that's not on the agenda? Okay. All right, then we have the approval of the agenda itself. Anybody want to add anything to the agenda, or is this pretty much good to go? Okay. We normally take a motion for that?
Usually we do.
Okay, so can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of approving the agenda for tonight, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Okay,
There's a little time delay.
all right, that motion carries. Okay, we'll move on to Planning Commission business, amendments to the sewage management program.
So, last year, the Board of Supervisors approved a sewage planning waiver for a 220 acre property that was being subdivided into two equally sized lots. And at that time, the Township solicitor recommended that perhaps in the future, the Township would want to adopt regulations that would specify when a sewage planning waiver could or could not be approved by the Township. A sewage planning waiver, as it implies, is just that where at the time of subdivision or land development, the property owner that's likely subdividing their property would not need to go through the process of identifying appropriate absorption areas on the properties that are being created. It's not something that municipalities are required to do. It is something that if they choose to waive sewage planning, DEP does provide a form to do so. And that form that was provided to the Planning Commission last year has a couple scenarios in which they state it might be appropriate to waive sewage planning. So when the Planning Commission discussed it last March, you had identified a few of those that you felt would be acceptable and recommend that staff go back and put together some language. So tonight in your agenda, there's a copy of the Township's sewage management ordinance, specifically the part that addresses replacement area testing for subdivision and land development. As you note, there was one small change that we were recommending under C, which we've recognized was just a kind of a part that contradicted itself, but most importantly was the section K, which we put together that would provide the criteria for the Township of when a sewage planning waiver could be waived by the board, or be approved by the Board of Supervisors, thereby waiving sewage planning requirements. Keep in mind, it's still something the board would not have to do. It's not a requirement that if someone comes in and says, I don't want to do sewage planning for the reason of what I'm doing here with my land development, the board could still say no. But this at least would provide some criteria rather than it just being more or less open-ended, and folks might get the wrong idea they can come in and get anything waived. So we just wanted to get feedback from the Planning Commission if this is on the right track, if you feel it needs to be expanded or worded differently, and move forward from there.
Okay, and I assume that as long as you get favorable comments, you would actually put this into an ordinance, and would that come back to us again then?
Typically, no, we would send it on to the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, so we maybe should make a recommendation to the
Yep.
board then?
Yep.
All right. So anybody have any comments on, particularly on section K?
This is Chris. I have a comment.
I'll get you some. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, first of all, it's pretty hard to hear the people in the room on Zoom. I don't know if the master volume there can be turned up. I think your microphones are probably close enough, but it's just a little It's a little hard, not impossible, but a little hard. Mark, why your pessimism on, the board doesn't have to, that their waiver approval can happen? I guess I understand why that's the case, but do you think that putting language like this together will make them think twice? Board of Supervisors think twice about that?
Well, I would hope that with this criteria being in there, they would not approve waivers that don't meet this criteria.
Right.
I think without the criteria, it's much more open-ended, and we could have, additional property owners coming in the future doing a minor subdivision that is
Right.
ultimately creating a buildable lot, but because they say they don't want to build on it right now, they don't have to do the sewage planning. And as we talked before, that passes it on then to the purchaser of the property. And it also is difficult for staff to remember when these things were skipped in the process. So I wouldn't say I'm being pessimistic. I think having this in the ordinance would hopefully be much more clear to both the applicant and our current board and future board of when it would be okay to consider a waiver request.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from the planning commission right now? All right, I do have one audience member, Paul Wiener, if
Paul,
you
can
want
you
to
come to the
comment?
microphone, please?
I'm wondering, what are the circumstances that you would pass a waiver?
The way the ordinance is worded, it would be if the lot that's being created would be for a non-sewage generating use. So it could be something like a stormwater facility, if the lot's gonna contain just a stormwater basin, or a wireless communications tower, something that's not going to have a bathroom or have sewage generating uses on the property.
Okay.
I guess I would note too that the waiver that was granted last year that would not meet this criteria.
I don't believe so, no, because a large lot that it said it was gonna be used for agricultural purposes, could easily be built upon at any time. Now, obviously, there's a lot of land area, so hopefully there'd be an acceptable perk site, but, it's still not something I think is a good idea to wager, because where do you draw the line and say, well, that's big enough, we're not gonna worry about it, but these properties, because they're 12 acres or 15 acres, we are gonna worry about it. I think it's just better to kind of follow with, if it's non-sewage generating, there's really no chance of there being anything on there, otherwise, that's when it's okay.
Well, that does include the note, then, if it's non-sewage generating, that if in the future that changes.
Right,
And that's part of the recorded plan.
yeah.
So hopefully anybody that buys a lot would see that note on the plan and would be aware of that.
Yes,
Hopefully.
So-
hopefully.
So, well, if we don't have any other comments, I would entertain a motion to recommend to the supervisors approval of this suggested amendment to the sewage management regulations.
I move for
So
approval.
moved.
Second.
Yeah, I so moved.
Okay, got a motion from Chris.
And Rich just
And
seconded.
Rich, okay. Okay, all in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Thank you. Hey, Chris, are you hearing any better?
Yeah, it's better, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, next on the agenda is the residential zoning update.
Okay, so at last month's meeting, or actually 2 months ago, I apologize, last month you had training. Back in April, the planning commission had continued their discussion on updating the residential zoning districts and possibly looking at some type of a hybrid zoning district or an overlay that would potentially increase the development density of several of the very large R1 parcels that remain within the growth boundary. At that meeting in April, it was a 25% of the dwellings within the development were attached and 75% were single-family detached. And at that time, the commission had indicated that that was probably not as dense as you might be comfortable with. Maybe we could bump that number up, and Mr. Igo recommended that maybe a table of some sort showing how these lots would be impacted based on different percentages would be valuable. So that's what I put together in your agenda. And what this is showing, this table shows 6 different parcels that are vacant R1 zoned land within the regional growth boundary. Shows 100% single family dwellings, and then starting at 25% attached units, moving the whole way up to 75% attached units. So you can see that as the percentage of attached units increases, certainly you're going to have more unit potential overall. 100% single family dwelling, it's, again, these are estimates, it's 373. By allowing some attached dwellings to be interspersed throughout the development on these properties, you can go from 417 at 25% to as high as 545 if it was 75% attached. And obviously everywhere in between there. These estimates are certainly based on a maximum build-out scenario as well. So keep that in mind. It would be assuming that the property owner would maximize the potential on the land, which I don't believe we've ever seen, have experienced here in the township in the last, several decades. Normally lots are larger than what the ordinance requires. But I also had our graphics person put together a rendering of what, I apologize, I'm having a hard time pulling up, of what 50-50 would look like. So hopefully that was helpful to see, yeah, I have a copy, I was gonna share it.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so this rendering shows what 50% single-family detached, and then 50% of the area being utilized for attached dwellings. And then we also put in some open space on here, because I know that was something we had talked about, as well as some greenery. We did not include bike paths and pedestrian, but that's something we would do in future illustrations. I think ultimately what we'd like to do is, once the commission's identified kind of the standards that you think you'd like to, move forward with, potentially recommending to the board, we'd put together more detailed renders similar to what we did with the conservation design regulations in the rural zoning update. So just looking to get feedback from the planning commission tonight on what we've prepared in terms of the table as well as the graphic, to see if you have any ideas where you'd like to move forward with on this.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Okay.
Can I get comments from the planning commission members on, either the table or the drawing? Go ahead, Jeff.
Jeff, you're muted. Muted. Still muted, Jeff.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
There you go.
Looking at the percentage, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, looking at the percentages, I like the idea of 50%, because otherwise you don't get enough more family dwellings on the lower percentages. That when you get 100 more houses in the same parcel of land. And I guess I'm leaning toward having a little density in the property we have left.
Okay, I agree with you completely. In fact, I'd say anything less would not be effective, but going up to 75%, I think if we get to that point, we probably should look at just rezoning the property, is my thought. And by the way, would we be creating a new district then?
I think the verdict's still out on how this would work, if there'd be an overlay or just an entirely new district. I think that's something Todd and I will discuss to maybe come up with a strategy based on your feedback and see what would work best with the properties that would remain in whatever other districts we have.
Create a new district that, and then we would actually call out which, if we want to use all 6 of these parcels you mentioned, or maybe some of them aren't appropriate.
Sure.
That's just my thought on it. Any other comments?
I like the 50% as well. I think that the layout that you showed in the rendering was very helpful as well.
Okay. We have an audience comment. Paul, if you want to come on up.
I'm wondering what the overall purpose of this change is.
That,
So, over the last couple of years, the township's been looking at its zoning ordinance and updating its zoning ordinance. In particular, they just finished a rural rezoning for all the areas outside the regional growth boundary. The planning commission's been looking at the residential areas zoned, or the areas zoned residential within the growth boundary, and trying to see if there's ways of accommodating additional growth within the boundary and the remaining vacant lands that are left, so as not to continue to push development out into the rural areas. So we have very little vacant residentially zoned land within the growth boundary that can accommodate future growth here for the township. But looking at this and seeing if there's ways of trying to provide some kind of hybrid zoning densities to allow for some attached dwellings to be interspersed with single-family detached dwellings, it would increase the capacity of these properties and hopefully sustain development for the township for a longer period.
So the purpose is to allow the R1 land to develop more densely.
One land. There hasn't been a determination of where this density increase would be allowed. It's not that everything that's zoned R1 would be in this district. It's more a discussion about these large vacant parcels and which ones would be most appropriate for allowing some additional density on them.
Well, so the board has to decide which parcels apply.
Yeah, there'll be a report that would ultimately go to the board that's going to include whatever methodology the planning commission kind of settles on of which properties they feel this should apply to. We're not to that point yet. At this point, it was more of a exercise of trying to understand what type of density the township might want to achieve in the growth boundary with what land is left. So I think the next step will be to decide where this type of district will apply. So yeah, that would be the next step in this process.
Now, it would be difficult to me to say this applies to one parcel and it doesn't apply to another parcel.
I think it's gonna have to do with what's surrounding some of these properties, whether or not there's similar uses nearby to make it consistent. Again, we haven't come up with the zoning strategy. It might be that some properties that are zoned R2 might get rolled into this new zoning district. And that way you have consistency between these vacant properties and what's next door. It's still, there's a process that needs to take place to identify where this would be most appropriate.
And Mark, didn't we also talk, when we started talking about this, that this would be almost a transition zone
Right.
between a higher density property and a lower density property? So that if the Bull Mansion property, for example, were ever to develop, it wouldn't just be, large lot, single family houses next to the village, which is denser development. So this would be creating like a transition zone. So it doesn't stick out that you have this lower density housing next to the higher density housing.
Yeah, and again, it's my thought
that we, if we write the ordinance, actually create a new zoning district, that would be kind of a hybrid of R1 and R2, that we simultaneously amend the map and identify which parcels we're talking about, so we would know precisely, and that would be part of the public hearing process, and everyone could comment about whether they think it's appropriate or not. So, Other thoughts? So do you want to take this to the board, or are you just going to, if we're acceptable to this, you're going to just try to write something up then?
I think it would be a good idea to start putting together some base regulations, I mean, obviously the density part, it sounds like 50% is what you're comfortable with. I think putting together regulations as well with showing any other amenities and things you'd want to see to try to emphasize that transition would be good before you take anything to the board, just so they can understand the overall vision beyond just density alone, but how it's going to fit and work within the township.
I agree with that. And I think a map would be helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, it's something we can work on for the next time we talk about this, I think.
Okay. Okay, then any other comments, or should we just allow staff to move on with this then?
Oh, Jeff has his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Jeff.
Is there, hey, Mark, is there any information out there that shows what is being bought, what is being sold, and where the demand is, the type of housing that we're considering?
Well, as far as what's being bought and sold, that's just what we can track through county records, but I mean, it would just be a matter of watching the deed transfer information. As far as what the demand is, that's something that is a little more difficult to measure, because a lot of times I think, developers build what they believe will sell. And, as we've seen in the township, large homes sell and townhomes sell. It seems like everything's selling. As far as, where the demand is and how much demand there is for both those styles of houses, I don't know that we have an easy way of quantifying that.
Well, one of the things that brought this to my attention was how fast the gates got bought out. And after going up there a few times for remodeling jobs, the number of young people that talked about waiting years to be able to find a house to be able to buy anywhere in State College, it was just repeated to me multiple times. And so this is just an effort to maybe bring a few more of those online. And I didn't know if anybody else had any more solid information than just my hearsay.
We rely on your hearsay a lot.
Any other comments? Okay, well then, we'll expect to see this at the next, appropriate open agenda time. So we can move on to the primary scale solar study.
Yeah, so I'm not planning to do a presentation this evening, as I had just done one back in February, and nothing has changed since that presentation in February in terms of what the report recommended. But since that time, the CRPA did finish up the report that included kind of a general overview of what utility scale solar is and how these could be developed in the center region in a way that would be consistent with the center region comprehensive plan. So what I was bringing it back to the Planning Commission for this evening, and you all should have received a link to that final report, was to get your input on whether or not you wanted to move forward in recommending that any of that report, part of that report, be implemented here in the township. So keep in mind, this is utility scale, primary scale. This is not a farmer having a large solar field to support their operations. This would literally be a solar power plant in what would likely be a rural area. I don't know where else we would allow it here in the township that would have significant enough land area. If the township wants to go down that path, then certainly there is recommendations on requiring agrivoltaics as a means of trying to ensure that farming remains a part of these properties where the solar farm could theoretically be developed. So to keep in mind, there are 3 other municipalities here in the center region that do allow utility grade solar. And based on the MPC, the municipality's planning code, you do not need to provide for that use. If you were ever challenged that that the township doesn't allow for it, you could rely upon, they're allowing for it. The MPC requires the courts and the zoning hearing boards and everyone else to consider that availability, and certainly Patton, Ferguson, and College Township have a significant amount of land area where these uses could theoretically go in the future. So anyway, as I mentioned, I'm just looking for feedback. I know the Planning Commission had expressed an interest in talking about it. This report mainly was put together because Harris Township was approached by a developer at one point. So, yeah, if you wanted to move forward with this, I think it'd be good to identify, what you'd want to consider implementing, and then probably discuss that with the board, I would assume.
Okay, so I guess,
Jeff has his hand up, sorry.
Jeff?
I just want to say, I'm for permitting it. And so if we want to talk about, what amounts that we would allow on the acreage, I'm for that, but I'm really for allowing it to be fully used at the farmers association.
So Jeff, I'll ask, are we talking in the ag districts or any other zoning district are you thinking about?
Well, I mean, it would be nice if we had some projects that, some areas that were old mines, and obviously nobody would care about that. Maybe they would put it on that quarry that's, out near Samus's. I'm not sure if that's in Harris Township or not. I don't know how many pieces of parcels of property that we had that would be non-agricultural and just abandoned mine sites. I don't remember any, but most likely it's going to happen on agricultural property, is my guess. And I just don't feel it's my position to tell a farmer that he can't make $600 or $700 an acre on a 20-year lease, when I'm kind of leaning toward a green solar energy system anyhow. So there's two things that stop me on it. We certainly didn't do much about stopping them to put gas in. Why would we stop them about solar?
Just to interject, the gas was different. The state of Pennsylvania stripped our ability to zone the gas out. And so we had to let them expand the gas.
So any other comments from Planning Commission? So,
Chris has
Chris, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Mark, this is a question for you. I think there was mention in the report about the proximity, at least in current technology, there needs to be proximity to some kind of electrical substation for this to even be viable. Now, I know for long term that might change as technology changes, but I think that really limits, let's just say for the next, 10, 20 years in Harris Township, where a utility scale project could even be installed. So I guess it's not much of a question, just an observation. And could we show that on a map, maybe when this gets to a next stage? So let me go on while I have the floor for just a second. That's one comment or question. And the other is relating to this prime ag soils and soils of statewide importance. I really like the couple of workarounds that were suggested in the plan that would not bump up against those concerns unless there was a sort of a compromise. This was the incorporating agrivoltaics or wellhead protection or the comparable acreage adjacent or surrounding that would be protected. I think those are really important to us. So despite a farmer wanting more money for his acreage, we're required essentially to protect these ag soils. And so this compromise to put a solar installation on prime ag soils, I think is something really important that we need to maintain throughout the plan as it goes through different drafts.
I'll just mention on the comments about proximity. So it's proximity to a certain size power line itself, and then obviously a nearby substation that can have the capacity to take that additional energy being fed into it and then distribute it. My understanding, as with most things in the world, anything can be engineered to make it work. So if they need to run the line, they can run the line, and if the developer's willing to pay the cost to upgrade the substation if it's not big enough, it could be done. The problem here is we don't have the ability to get data from the electric utility companies, the providers, due to national security reasons. They won't tell us
Right.
where these lines exist or how much capacity their substations have. Now, the one out along Shingletown Road clearly had enough capacity for an interconnect to be approved for a 90-acre system that was proposed back in 2020, or at least brought up here in the township. So we know there was capacity out there to handle at least one system. It's just very difficult to narrow down geographically the limitations, because again, if the cost is right, a developer will run that power line
Yeah, okay.
to get to the
That's helpful,
substation.
thank you.
Yep.
Where was that again?
Mark? That one that was proposed?
It was basically along Windmill Road,
Okay.
right off of 45.
So, yeah, I mean, your report is, the way I'm reading it is it's not recommending that, that we would allow it on prime ag soils under any conditions.
Right.
But that if we were to allow it, that we would recommend that agrivoltaics be used, which you talked about at your last meeting, which is basically kind of an intermix of the solar panels with agricultural uses. And so the issue is if you have prime soils, and then if you get up off this prime soils, now you're probably starting to get into some of your slopes, which you for stormwater purposes, we're not recommending they go on steeper slopes. So I do think that it would be difficult for us to find a large area, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know if anybody can think other than, out in, we have that substation out past Shingletown, but that's probably pretty good farmland out there too, I think. So it's a tough call. So another option we have is to just not provide that in our zoning at this time, and hopefully rely on these to grow in other areas of the center region. But like, get other opinions on that.
I think the study included a map that showed non-prime farmland areas that were available. and
Yeah,
it
that's right.
was pretty limited. I didn't look to see what the slopes are, and how big a deal steeper slopes may be, as much as the facing of the solar field relative to those slopes.
Yeah, in most cases, I think it was on page 13 of the report where we kind of distilled down the land area that could be used. The orange areas that were not prime ag but weren't publicly owned in state forest and whatnot, they are very steep. These are areas that are probably 15 to 25% slopes, not necessarily everywhere, but there might be some pockets of flat land, or flatter soils, but it is where it's steep, and it's also typically where you're going to have forested areas too. So then you're also looking at a deforestation situation. I don't know the township would necessarily want to see the hillsides, modified that way either.
Yeah, I'm just not sure that steep slopes necessarily, from a stormwater standpoint, if we're allowing for the pervious soils underneath and appropriate vegetative cover, et cetera, that's necessarily a showstopper to me. I think we have kind of a similar case, in maybe not 30 acres, but out near the hospital, where the solar field is on a relatively steep slope, and I'm not aware, at least, of erosion problems or stormwater problems down slope, and certainly there are some ways to mitigate that if we need to.
Okay, other comments? I mean, I'll suggest maybe what we do is put this on the back burner and see if we get pressures to put in, a primary scale solar project. And we, at least we have, you know, I guess some, not necessarily sample regulations, but certainly some ideas of what we would want to go with if in fact we do get those pressures. So, I mean, I would suggest that we just do that, not take any action at this time, and wait to see, you know, how these things come up in other municipalities, and if we start getting pressure in Harris Township. I don't know, are there thoughts on that comment?
I think that's an appropriate tack to take.
Okay,
And I think now that we have the toolkit, I think we have a lot more available for conversation than we have had. And I think it's really helpful. So when we were asked earlier about development of a farmland, we didn't know how to respond. So this toolkit is now very helpful in laying out that the priority is to balance.
Well, and I think if we get another person who's interested in developing this, we won't be relying on the developer to do the education. And I think that was a lot of the problem the last time. We relied on the developer's agent to try to educate us.
So, are the supervisors going to be hearing this as well? You're going to be taking this to them?
No, I think they've heard, some of them have heard.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
already.
this has been prepared or presented to COG committees, so they're aware of what's in the report.
So they're at least aware that the toolkit now exists.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we can definitely let them know, I can let them know in my manager's report that you guys reviewed the toolkit and you decided to wait until we would get another, project interest.
Okay. Any other comments? All right, thanks a lot. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
I think in reality, what you're looking at is, as I've lived here so long, is that it's just another tool for a person who owns land. Do you not want to look at solar panels and would prefer to look at subdivision with, 3, 5, 10 acre parcels of property divided and sold and have development on? Because when a farmer wants to give up farming and nobody wants to take it over, this is a tool now that has come forward to him that he can make a living and do something with his land. His other option is he's going to subdivide it and sell off property.
I recognize that, and luckily, of course, we just spent 10 years working on an ordinance for that, but
That's what's happened and will continue to happen.
so, I guess, I'm not disagreeing with Jeff, I'm just thinking that maybe if we just wait to see what kind of pressures we get on that, and then we'd have a better idea of how we should write these regulations if we do get those types of pressures.
Chris has his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
if we get those kinds of pressures, what's going to be the trigger that says, oh, we need to write regulations and put something, into our ordinances? What's that trigger? How many inquiries, I guess, would be helpful to have an idea of that. And then 2, how long would it take for that process to work itself through the Board of Supervisors and become, utility scale solar ordinance?
Honestly, we were thinking about writing regulations in the past with the other project, right? That was one of the discussion points we were having. We were trying to get to the point where we were trying to decide what to do. I think now if you had another inquiry, right now we don't allow it in our zoning ordinance. So right now they can't do it. But if you have someone who comes in and is as serious as that group was back at the time, I think then you say, okay, well, we don't have the regulations, but we have a path. Because I talked to some woman out in western Pennsylvania in Beaver County that they worked with, or Butler County, to try to get regulations that they had written for them. We just don't want to be in the position where someone's writing the regulations for us. But I think given this toolkit that we have, it's probably 6 months to get an ordinance together and then get it through the supervisors. And there's a fair bit of education you still have to do, but we hadn't laid a lot of that groundwork before, right? Before we were coming into it totally green. And now at this point, at least we have a little bit more education already done, and we sort of understand the issues. So
I think too, with having the report, you know, if we do have a developer come forward and meet with the township, we can always share with them that this is something that's been prepared, because much like Amy said, we had nothing to go off of. If they get an idea of here's what the township might be looking at in terms of agrivoltaics and things, it's going to give them a better picture, and maybe we'll know better whether or not they're interested. I think the developer that came was interested, knowing that they had an ordinance ready for us to adopt, as opposed to us saying here's some things we might want if we do have an ordinance, and that might, you know, change the discussion a bit as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments? All right, thank you. Then, I guess, Amy, if you could just, convey our opinion on that to the board, and we'll wait to see if we get other pressures in the future here, and meantime, work on other projects. So, next on the agenda is to discuss our agenda for July.
I just want to make Todd speak because he's on the Zoom. Todd, do you know if we're going to have any plans for July? I mean,
He's right.
No, I don't think, Mark can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have anything in the pipeline now, either plan-wise or planning module-wise.
Not that I can think of, no.
Would you have enough time to start working on this residential
Hopefully.
district? Okay. Cross your fingers.
and I'd like to start working on the sign ordinance. That's on my plate to do. So,
Okay.
this sign ordinance update, the Gilbert.
There's been some changes we might want to talk
Oh
about.
Lord. Then maybe not.
There's been additional cases since now.
Oh, good. Maybe not then.
So, might possibly be on July or not?
It depends on what he tells me tomorrow,
Oh,
or
okay.
he's off tomorrow.
I'm
What he
off,
tells me
yeah.
next week.
Okay.
And you may also see, I think Randy will provide an update on the village parking, but you may see pieces of that start coming forward after they meet with the board in July.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a good lead into reports. So, start with zoning permits. Is there anything we need to look at?
There are no zoning permits to sign tonight, according to Mr. Shea.
Okay. All right, CRPC. Amy, do you have?
And Chris will be reporting for
Oh,
the
yes.
CRPC.
Oh.
Sorry, I forgot to change that.
That's okay.
Yep. We had, on June 2nd, a very brief consent agenda that was part of the CRPC, what was the CRPC meeting, for maybe 8 or 10 minutes before the training session for planning commission members that Mark and colleagues put together. Those minutes are available. I don't need to go through what they were talking about, but I will comment that the training, now the second one that we've had, we hosted it in Harris Township in May, and then June was the one at the center region. They're really helpful. I'm 4+ years, 5 years maybe on planning commission. I still feel like a beginner, maybe intermediate skill. And so having these trainings is very, very helpful. And I just want to applaud, here publicly, Mark, you and your colleagues' work on putting those together. And I find them very interesting, and they raise a lot of questions. And, we look forward to the next one. I think we pushed it back. It's going to be in the fall. And the next CRPC meeting will not happen until August. They will not meet in July.
Used to you not being on that. The CCMPO Technical Committee, George Harrigan did provide us a written report about a week ago. It covered a lot of material. I'll just touch on some of the highlights. PennDOT, their project manager, Dean Ball, reported that they're still working on the update of the State College Area Connector projects, or their documents for that. And it's pushing back their next meeting, and I assume he means a public presentation meeting, into August or September. And But they should have some GIS mapping available on their website soon, so that'll be interesting to see if we get any of that. George also commented on the TIP update, which is the funding update, and one of the issues was that there is a definite shortfall from the budget for this Phase 3 of the Atherton Street upgrade project, which anyone would notice if they're driving on Atherton Street right now. So it's expanding the length of time out, like from 3 to 4 years, and it's raised the cost of the project by $11 million, from 23 to 34 million. So they're looking at trying to amend the TIP to accommodate that. So, and then George also noted that they're working on their longer range TIP for the final draft for 23 to 26, and they currently have $82 million set up for highways and another $82 million for transit. So those are the key highlights. He did also comment that in addition to Tom Zillow retiring from the staff of CRM, from the MPO staff, that Trish Meek is she got a statewide bicycle and pedestrian coordinator position, and she has left also. So a lot of changes with the MPO. So that's it. Any questions on George's report? Okay. The Spring Creek Watershed Commission, Bob, do you?
We met in May. Our next meeting is in July. But one of the things that came out of the meeting in May is we moved forward with the appointment of a Phase 3 water group. And I'm on that group. So the Watershed Commission is starting to pick up a little bit of traction on making some changes and looking at moving forward with that big agenda. So it's moving.
All right, thank you.
We have the Village Parking Committee. Randy, do you have anything new to bring up?
Yeah, Amy spent the last couple of weeks preparing a final report. I missed the last meeting because I had concert tickets that same evening. So we're meeting tomorrow evening, I believe.
We have the draft report and we haven't received a lot of comments on it, so.
Oh, you have? Okay, so we're not meeting tomorrow then?
No.
Okay. But it's, in my opinion, it's ready to go to the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah, so the Village Parking Committee did a great job, and Mark is to be commended because Mark did a ton of research. We looked at, 10 or 12 communities from across the state to see what they were doing parking-wise. We studied some of the issues that we have within the village, and they've put together a series of 5 recommendations for the Board of Supervisors to consider. Some of them are low-hanging fruit, like changing. Right now, we allow properties to basically share parking adjacent properties in the village or village commercial zoning district if they're within 66 feet of each other, and that was done specifically for a specific property back in 1985. So one of their recommendations is to look at changing that number to be something that's a little more useful, adding some more spots where we could put more municipal parking lots on the official map, because we're realizing that's a good tool. That's what a lot of other communities use. We did finally, after all these years of talking to the fire company and the churches to let them use their parking lots. That's in like every report if you go back. We talked to them, and that's maybe a possibility, but there's some things that need to be talked about with that. And then I think this committee's road diet, right? The small area plan had the road diet as their big recommendation. This committee's road diet is the recommendation that the Board of Supervisors consider creating a special overlay district that would take into consideration, we have 4 or 5 properties along the Diamond that don't have any off-street parking available to them because of when they were developed. And we have several other properties along the Diamond in our historic village center, commercial core, that they can't meet impervious coverage limitations, they can't meet lot coverage, that stuff. So looking at creating an overlay district, which is something that we heard was done in Lidditz Borough in Lancaster County. So I think it's a good report. I think everybody worked really hard on it. I think it'll be interesting to see what comes of it once it's presented to the board. It'll be presented July 11th at their meeting.
So at this point, there's no public presentation of the report. It's not something that can be seen yet.
I can, yeah, I want the committee to give me their final sign off on it. They looked at all their edits, and we canceled the meeting tomorrow because virtually nobody can come to the meeting, and I said, just let me know. And all the feedback I've gotten has been good. So once it goes out for the board, then I can send it out to you guys as well, once I know that everyone's okay with it. But committee did a lot of work, and I appreciate all of their efforts and all of Mark's efforts. Mark did a ton of research and a ton of just looking at how much on-street parking is actually available, and then how many residential units do we have that are taking up some of that parking, and how many non-residential units are non-conforming, and kind of getting a good idea of what the situation is within the village.
In comparison to other villages.
Yes. Yeah, I think that was the biggest help. We found a couple little villages that are like our village. But then we found a lot of places that are, like a lot of these places we looked at, Kennett Square and Lidditz, they're bigger places. They're boroughs. They're bigger places. They have different challenges than we have. Their main street is like Route 322. It's like Bull Avenue for us. It's not like our main street. So, and even we looked locally at some of the stuff that was going on. Like College Township does the shared parking as well. So I think there's good stuff in there.
So the overlay district, would that have amended regulations that would allow less parking requirements on site? Was that the point of it?
Yeah, theoretically, it would look at parking, impervious coverage, lot coverage. It would also look at the uses and the intensive nature of the uses that are allowed within that zone. Because, for example, right now there's a dog groomer in there, and the dog groomer is a drop-off business. So it really doesn't have any off-street parking needs, right? They have 2 employees, but those employees can park on the street. People are dropping off dogs and leaving. They're not staying. If that were to change and become, at one point someone wanted to put a microbrewery on the Diamond, that would be a much different use and a much different need. So looking at scale too, I don't know that we've ever really, or I think we did in the past, but I don't know we have recently looked at scale of the uses within the village.
Okay. Well, thank you, Randy, for serving on that.
Chris has got his hand up.
Okay, Chris.
Who's going to present the committee's report to the Board of Supervisors?
It'll be somebody from the committee. I'm not sure if it'll be the committee chair or if it'll be somebody else or a couple of people, but hopefully somebody from the committee will do it.
May I suggest that to optimize the chance that it be favorably received, that person maybe rehearse or walk through the presentation, if it's going to be a volunteer, doing that in advance?
Yeah, ideally. The committee chair was Bob Hoffman, and Bob's amazing, and he's on the College Township Planning Commission. He's an architect, so I'm hoping Bob has had some health challenges, so I'm hoping that he'll be able to do that.
Thank you. Anything on the official map to discuss?
I'll just give a quick update. The official map is doing a survey to find out where people want to walk, bike, or wheel to. Wheeling is a thing, according to Mark. We've had how many responses so far?
I don't know how many we've had on the survey. I know the survey had over 100 the last time I looked, but
We have a mapping
we also have a
feature.
map, an application that you can go on and draw lines where you'd like to see bike paths and place points where you want to see a crosswalk. And we have 11 suggestions and 41 proposed connections, one of which is someone really does not like the intersection out here and would like it to go away. But otherwise, they are actual suggestions on where you could walk or bike or wheel. So yeah, it's good feedback.
So that'll be open until the beginning of July, and then the committee will look at the results and decide how they want to move forward.
Okay. Yeah, I saw one sign up on the trail up above Calvary Baptist. Is there other signs posted around?
Yeah, we have one on Warner Boulevard on that bike path because that's very well used. We have one in Phasic Park, one in Nittany View.
Yep.
And one in Blue Spring Park because those are our better used parks. Any other trails?
I put one up at Galbraith Gap.
Oh, look at you. Galbraith Gap. I didn't even know that. Yeah. So, and there's a QR code, so we want people to use the QR code, and we're trying to get as much feedback as we possibly can. There's a Facebook group in town, the Bullsburg Community Facebook page. So people post, questions or whatever. And somebody said, oh, we need a 4-way stop sign in Kaywood. And somebody wrote and said, take the township survey, tell them you need a 4-way stop. And I'm like, no, that's not really.
We've had 111 survey responses, I just looked.
Oh, nice.
So, good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, actions by the Board of Supervisors.
So they approved the Kaywood North Estate Lots Final Subdivision Plan, which of course just mirrored what they had seen before, and you saw that in April. And then I think this is pretty exciting, and that's probably a realization that I'm a dorky township manager, but the board discussed the road diet was not overly well received by the general public. So the board actually is moving forward with a needs study for Bowl Avenue, working with our traffic engineer, Rob Watts. You guys all took that survey. We have 6 projects that are going into the scope of work. And then we added a 7th project, which is to make pedestrian crossing upgrades at the intersection of Old Bollesburg Road and the Military Museum, where that fatal accident was back in March. So we've actually in the process of applying for an ARLI grant from PennDOT, which is an automated red light enforcement grant, to put in pedestrian crossings. It would be a rapid flashing beacon and some overhead signage, and basically trying to get the cars to slow down and stop when there are pedestrians crossing there. We'll be doing some traffic counts next week, so we'll have a very good idea of how many people are crossing there. When we met with PennDOT on site, we were shocked at the number of people that at 10 o'clock on a Thursday or whatever it was, that they were just crossing, going across, running, jogging, biking, whatever. So we want to make that area safer. PennDOT also encouraged us, and we sent the letter to ask for a speed study along that stretch of road. They believe that they could lower the speed limit from 40 miles an hour to 35 miles an hour. And as part of this ARLI grant, we're actually applying for some money for the speed sentries, so we can put them on the signs out there to tell people what their speed is, all in an effort to get people to slow down, because it is a pretty pedestrian and bicycle aggressive corridor. So it's really interesting. The needs study that Rob Watts is working on, it's a $63,000 project, but the goal is we'll have then project scopes, timelines, construction schedules, and we can use those pieces to go out and identify funding sources and then apply for funding for these various pieces. So like the left turn lane at the Bollesburg Pike and Church Street is a big one, and looking at some signal upgrades and some other safety things.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Okay, anything else that anybody wants to bring up tonight? Okay, I will ask for a motion for adjournment. Okay, motion from Amy. You got a second on that?
Second.
Okay, Rich. Okay, all in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. We are adjourned.